This is Mac OS Ken.
Just how over COVID is Apple? A silent war over a long-held grudge. And Mac OS Ken turned 17.
Wow, what an amazing day.
It is Thursday, the 26th of January, 2023. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. On Twitter, platformer journalist Zoe Schiffer said Wednesday, Apple is making changes to its COVID-19 policy and will stop mandating employees test before coming into the office. It's also rolling back its special sick leave policy, which previously allowed for unlimited sick leave for workers experiencing COVID symptoms. Schiffer went on in a follow-up tweet, saying testing policy rolls out on the 30th of January, sick leave ends in August. Until then, employees get a maximum of 5 days sick leave if they test positive for COVID. It is apparently on that 9to5Mac built its article, Apple drops COVID-19 test requirement. Could WWDC expand in 2023? Because that is certainly the most important thing. For clarification, 9to5Mac says unlimited sick days end in August. The wording on Schiffer's tweet was kind of weird, though I'm not sure whether the 9to5Mac clarification is based on a clarification from Schiffer or simply 9to5Mac's own read. As for the supposition that WWDC might go back to being in person, that seems to be a completely 9to5Mac production. Last year, the piece points out, Apple invited a limited number of developers to attend WWDC directly from Apple Park. However, just like the iPhone 14 launch, the event was pre-recorded despite the people there. One can see the possibility. Still, whether making it easier for employees to come back to the office, whether they want to or not, equates to welcoming folks from around the world to crowd rooms, rub elbows, and share breathing space, remains to be seen. Cold Wars, Cola Wars, Secret Wars. Silicon Valley has a silent war, it seems, one being waged between Apple and Google. Oh, I don't know that that's true, but it's what the Financial Times says. Or what the Financial Times says two people inside Apple say. Well, two people who used to be inside Apple. Under the headline, Apple beefs up smartphone services in silent war against Google, the site says two former Apple engineers said the iPhone maker has held a grudge against Google ever since the search giant bought, developed, and promoted Android as an alternative to iPhone and iOS. According to the report, Apple is taking steps to separate its mobile operating system from features offered by Google parent Alphabet, making advances around maps, search, and advertising that has created a collision course between the big tech companies. Not good business sense, apparently, just a grudge. According to the report, one of these people said Apple is still engaged in a silent war against its arch-rival. It is doing so by developing features that could allow the iPhone maker to further separate its products from services offered by Google. Apple did not respond to requests for comment. The piece goes on to describe some of Apple's initiatives, including ongoing improvements to Apple Maps. That section highlights Business Connect. Introduced this month, Business Connect lets participating businesses customize the info cards that come up for them in Apple's mapping service. They can also fold in such Apple-related services as Apple Pay. There's also said to be an internal team at Apple called Apple Search. Whether its offerings would be a user-facing feature or a back-end framework powering a smarter Siri, one could see that denting Google's presence for iPhone users. Acting against all of this, though, is money. The Financial Times points to figures from the U.S. Department of Justice that have Alphabet paying Apple between $8 billion and $12 billion a year for Google to be the default search engine on iOS. There's also Apple's anticipated big move into online advertising, something that has been anticipated since iAd. Really, though, it's the 14-year-old Grudge. Like new iPhone 13 models have made the scene in Europe, Mac Rumors says refurbished iPhone 13 mini, Pro, and Pro Max units have hit Apple's refurbished stores in the UK, Germany, Italy, and Spain. The piece says this is the first time reconditioned versions of those phones have been made available by Apple. It also notes one model missing, the plain Jane iPhone 13. As for what is there, the piece says prices on the devices are discounted by 15% compared to the equivalent brand new models. As for when there will be here in the States, Mac Rumor says they should hit Apple's US refurbished store soon. The piece says the models are now listed on Apple's refurbished store in the States, but remain grayed out for now. This is typically a sign that availability will begin within a matter of days. Apple has adjusted the trade-in values it offers for various gear, and some of it has actually gone up. Mac Rumors ran a list Wednesday of a lot of Apple products and prices, potential prices. iPhones either stayed flat or went down in terms of what Apple might offer in trade. In the wake of last week's brouhaha over Apple offering less than $1,000 for a Mac Pro that Apple is still selling for over $52,000, it's somewhat surprising to see Apple's Mac's trade offerings for Mac going up in many cases. Of the 7 Macs listed in the piece, 3 of the machines saw their up to trade-in value unchanged, while 4 saw them rise. Meanwhile, the piece shows values on Apple Watch both up and down depending on the model. Trade-in values for iPad were flat across the board. A couple of reminders. Yes, Apple's trade-in option is convenient. It's often not the best value, though. That said, Apple does keep a running list on its site at apple.com/shop/trade-in. Apple has spruced up its support site. 9to5Mac says the new design is much more modern with large images and new icons that should offer easy access to some of the most common Apple support issues. Not sure how much time you're spending there, but don't be shocked by the new look next time you go. And wrapping up the news today, it looks like Apple is looking to plant another flag in its retail map. A piece from Bloomberg says the Cupertino company has started hiring for a store or stores in Malaysia. The listing is looking for all sorts of in-store folk, including managers, technical specialists, support staff, business-oriented salespeople, and operations experts. Indications are that these will be for Apple's own stores, not third-party partners. While the listing gives no indication as to where the first store will go, Bloomberg sees Kuala Lumpur, the nation's capital, as a likely starting point. No indication of a timeline on any of this. Apple declined to comment for the Bloomberg report. Today on the Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast, TMO Managing Editor Jeff Butts and I will talk over the Financial Times grudge match and Apple's reported new stance on COVID. That is all today on the Daily Observations podcast from the Mac Observer, online at macobserver.com or wherever you get podcasts. Speaking of those, hardcore macOS Ken listeners know what today is. The very first episode of this show went out to about 300 people on the 26th of January, 2006. It has not stopped. If we assume 5 days a week, we're looking at 260 shows a year, give or take. Even if you take out 15 per year for holidays, sick days, the occasional mental health day, That puts us somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,160 shows. Could be more, could be less. I stopped counting before we hit 1,000. The transition to Intel was still in progress when this show began. The best thing Apple had in telephony was the Motorola Rocker, which, spoiler, wasn't that great. We didn't have iPad yet. We did have Steve Jobs still. Something like COVID was the stuff of dystopian fiction. And if we were talking about TV, we were talking about TV, not streaming. And we were also way off topic. If you've been here the whole time, we have seen iPhone change the world, toppling Nokia and BlackBerry. We saw Steve Jobs pass. We saw Apple Park go from this idea Jobs presented at his last public appearance to an amazing corporate space, to a place that workers really don't want to go back to because, I don't know, soft pants and no commute maybe. We saw the iPod die. We saw the iPad born. We saw Johnny Ive leave the building, and we saw Tim Cook come into his own. We saw Apple become the most valuable company on the planet, and we continue to see it use that position to raise awareness around user privacy, environmental issues, and human rights concerns. Could Apple do more? Could Apple do better? Yeah, probably. But can you name another company that publicly does as much? Some years are iPhone, Apple Watch, iPad, and some years are 2022. More with the COVID, worker dissatisfaction, allegations of union busting, and Apple seeming at times to turn a deaf ear to the concerns of its employees. And China and Russia? Don't get me started. The story is not always fun, but it is one long story. And while it might not be enjoyable every day, it has been a joy to share it with you nearly every day for the past 17 years. If you patronize this show's sponsors, I do appreciate it. I try to be very careful about who I introduce you to. You supporting them keeps them supporting me, which is a circle for which we're all very grateful. If you have supported me directly over the years, either through Day 6 in years past or through Patreon today, I know I've said this before, but you humble me. I'm not always the best at fulfilling the promised perks. Far from it. And yet there you are. Please do not think that I am not appreciative. I would never have gotten here if you hadn't been there. If you've never supported me or my sponsors, but just shared this show with others, that means so much. And if all you have ever done is listen, well, that's at the heart of this whole thing, isn't it? And it is greatly appreciated. I guess what I'm saying is, thank you. The story continues. We will pick it up again tomorrow. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. info@macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.